Today's build is focused on the Moon Druid and using the wild shape ability that is so iconic for Druids. We're going to cover how to be an effective tank using the wild shape ability, what the wild shape forms are, at least in the early access, including how to get the Intellect Devourer. So let's go. This video is sponsored by you. If you go on to enjoy this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button, like, do all those YouTube things, you know how it goes. So the primary focus for this build is the wild shape ability, and primarily we are going to be using the polar bear creature that you can turn into. The polar bear has 30 HP, which is pretty high, and that goes on top of your normal HP, so it's practically an extra life. You also have a raw ability as the polar bear, so you can goad enemies into attacking you, and this is also really valuable as it's pretty much, I think, one of the only real taunts that's in the early access that's available at the moment. You can also dish out a fair amount of damage as well as this form, so it's a good valuable form for that all-rounder to taunt enemies to attacking you as well as dealing a bit of damage yourself. You can also use the Lunar Mend ability to use up those spell slots so that you can heal yourself while enemies are attacking you. It's also valuable to look at using concentration spells for this build because you can still hold a concentration spell while you are in your wild shape form, which I'll cover some of the best concentration spells to use later on in this video. Now let's first start off and build this character. We're going to start off with race. Now the race you want to pick here is the Gold Dwarf. This is the best option. You do get the +1 to Wisdom, which is our primary stat, plus the 2 to Constitution, as you don't need Strength or Dexterity technically, or Constitution either, while you are in your wild shape form, as these attributes are replaced with the creature stats. However, it's a good idea to have a high Constitution for when it does break so that you can take a couple of hits if necessary. In terms of your background, anything that gives proficiencies in the Wisdom skills is what you want to focus on, which are Animal Handling, Insight, Medicine, Perception, and Survival. Folk Cure is the best, as you do get 2 of these just right off the bat. This is also relevant when you are picking your skills, and you should choose from this list so you can maximize your skill checks that you do get from these as your character. Into your attributes, now stacking Wisdom is the most important thing, and this should be on 16 during your character creation. As a Gold Dwarf, you can also get your Constitution to 16 and your Dexterity to 14 for that extra AC as well as Initiative while you're not in your wild shape form. I would suggest to have your Intelligence and your Charisma to try and get them to about 10 so you don't have any negative effects, as these stats aren't replaced by your wild shape form. So if they're at 10, at least you don't get that minus effect from them if you do have any saving throws or anything that need to be cast during combat. Now for your initial spells and cantrips, as you get started, I really think there is only 2 major cantrip options to pick, and one of them is Thorn Whip, which is a hugely valuable ability for every druid regardless of your build. This ability does a 1d6 piercing damage and it can pull enemies closer to you. It's also a cantrip, so it's practically a free cast. The next is the Produce Flame ability. Now when you cast this, you will hold a flame in your hand. You can use this as a cast to throw at enemies and just deal fire damage. However, if you cast Produce Flame and then hold onto that flame and switch to wild shape form, this gives you a free light so that you don't get the downside of not having dark vision if you are fighting in melee range during combat. Another really common cantrip for the druid is Shillelagh. Now there is value in this except for this build, because we are focusing solely on using wild shape and the occasional spell. You are never really going to be using Shillelagh, which adds the Wisdom modifier to your melee weapon. If you are using your melee weapon past level 2, then you are doing something wrong. So this cantrip basically becomes irrelevant after level 2, which you do get to within the first hour of the early access, so I don't feel that this cantrip is important. In terms of spells, it is more personal preference, and these can be experimented with as you can change your spells at any time outside of combat. Some ones I would suggest, one being Thunder Wave, because this is a great melee ranged AoE, so that if your form is broken, you can pop this. It will deal a ton of damage with its 2d8 plus a knockback to give yourself a bit of space, as most of the time when you're in melee range, there's going to be multiple characters around you. Entangle is also valuable, as you can funnel enemies through your traps and have them get stuck in a location so that you can get to them quicker, or you can just keep them away from your ranged characters if you choose to. The last one that I would suggest to pick up is Fiery Fire, and this gives you advantage on attack rolls when you are targeting that enemy. This is important because it is a concentration spell and it can be used while you are in your wild shape form so it doesn't get broken. It's a good idea to use this because you're not going to be able to cast any other concentration spells, especially when you're in the darkness, and there are a lot of dark areas in the early access. Now once you're out of character creation and you start leveling up, the key decisions you make for this build are going to be at your levels, especially at level 2. And at level 2, you are going to choose the subclass, the Circle of the Moon. This will give you the Combat Wild Shape ability, which makes your wild shape a bonus action, so you can cast that in combat while you are also casting a spell as as your action in the same turn, and this will also give you the polar bear wild shape, which is unique to the Moon Druid specifically. The polar bear is the focus that you want to use as much as possible in combat because of that high health pool, because of the damage it can do, and the taunt. When you hit level 3, you will get access to level 2 spells. There is plenty of choice here to choose from, plus you will get level 2 variants of your existing spells. Some key spells that I would suggest is Flaming Sphere. Because it is a concentration, it can also act as its own individual in combat, so you can move it around and attack people with it. Bark Skin as well is a concentration spell that will give you extra AC, or you can put that onto one of your allies that you need to protect during combat. And Spike Growth, which operates pretty similarly to Entangle, however it does damage to creatures that are caught in its AoE rather than entangling them. There are definitely better level 2 spells for a Moon Druid to pick. However, the key focus here is on set and forget concentration spells. The reason for that is that once you have switched into your wild shape form, you're not going to be able to use that concentration spell again. So something like Moonbeam, where once you have used it, you want to move that beam around, or Heat Metal, where you want to activate that ability again, you won't be able to do that when you are in your wild shape form. So using these set and forget abilities still gives you the advantage of being able to hold concentration while in your wild shape form. At level 4, you will gain access to 2 new wild shape forms, Deep Wrath and the Raven, and you will also get a Cantrip. Now, I recommend Resistance here for the extra D4 into saving throws, because something like, again, Shillelagh, you're not going to be using very often, so one of these concentration cantrips is probably the better option. Now, for your feat, the best option is Ability Improvement and getting your Wisdom to 18. Pretty much it's the same for any class in the early access, is to get the Ability Improvement feat and to upgrade their primary stat to 18. It just gives the best value overall. Now, breaking down some equipment for this build, there isn't really much you need to worry about really at all, because your AC is switched to whatever creature you are anyway, so the armor you're wearing becomes redundant, same as using a conventional weapon here. However, for those times that your wild shape is broken, I would suggest to have some form of medium armor on, as well as a shield in your offhand, so that your AC is as high as possible in these moments. By the way, as well, if you are wondering what AC is and armor class and how that translates, you can check out my combat guide that I released for Baldur's Gate 3 Early Access, which breaks down what AC is and other mechanics in the game that are kind of in the background there. Let's talk about all of these wild shape forms. Now, initially at level 2, you will get the cat, the wolf, the badger, the spider, and because we picked a Moon Druid, we also get the polar bear. The cat really isn't for combat, so I really wouldn't bother there. It's mostly for sneaking around and doing some tricky things if you choose to go that route. The badger can do some solid damage. It also has the unique ability to burrow underground and pop out, which can do some knockback to enemies. However, it does have a very low health pool, so I wouldn't really suggest this to use very often. The wolf, however, can be a versatile damage dealer. It has a decent health pool. I've been using the wolf in some situations and I find it can hold its own ground, except it does have a little bit low of a health pool, which I'd like to be edited to increase a little bit, just so it feels a bit more standard. The spider is in a pretty similar boat to the wolf. However, you do have the unique arachnid jump and you can deal poison damage, which gives you a little bit more of an advantage over the wolf. But the key one you want to use here is going to be the polar bear in pretty much every situation. The high health pool, the solid attack, plus the taunt, it's a perfect choice. At level 4, you get access to the Raven and the Deep Wrath. Now, the Raven acts pretty much the same as the cat. You can use this to get into some high ground situations using the fly ability. However, I've pretty much never used it. The Deep Wrath, however, is actually really good. You've got a decent health pool, a very strong charge ability, and a decent basic attack. After I hit level 4, I did use the Deep Wrath a little bit in combat, but it is pretty much a give and take between the Deep Wrath and the polar bear. If you want to be a tank, go polar bear. If you want to do more damage, go Deep Wrath. The very last wild shape form that is available in the early access is the Intellect Devourer, and it's available at any level by using your Ithiliad abilities in dialogue options. You choose these options. After you've done them a few times, you will get some cinematics at your camp. I'm trying to be vague here to avoid spoilers if you haven't seen these yet. You will then be able to talk to your allies and you will unlock these abilities. Each of the classes do have their own ability, and for the Druid, this is their specific one. You can use this ability and you do have some decent abilities that do psychic damage. However, if you do use this around NPCs, they will immediately attack you. It also seems like in some situations your allies also attack you. I'm unsure at this time if that's a bug for your allies to attack you. However, it does make sense that NPCs do, because you are literally a mind flayer. So just be mindful if you are going to use this ability to keep this in mind. Now let's break down some tips for this build. Now, when you enter combat, I highly suggest you enter combat as the human form. This will allow allow you to cast a spell like Thorn Whip or a concentration spell. Then you can use your wild shape as your bonus action, use your movement to get as close as you can to the enemies, and then end your turn. Now, because we can hold concentration in combat, this is also why the polar bear is really valuable, because of your high constitution. So you do have a higher constitution for those saving throws, so you will most of the time keep the concentration spell active. When your wild shape HP hits 0, you will return to your human form with the full amount of your human health. You can then switch back in your next turn by using this bonus action again to bring back your wild shape form. You should be using the Lunar Mend ability as much as possible, as you don't really need spell slots once you have switched to your wild shape form. And you also shouldn't worry about expending spell slots unnecessarily, because you can just long rest at any time during the game. So you could even just long rest after every single fight. It really makes no difference. And also be mindful of what your wild shaper is carrying. When you do take the form of another creature, like a cat, for example, your strength is going to be very low, which means your carry weight is going to be very low. So it's very easy to become over encumbered while you are switching between these different forms, because your carry weight will change based on the strength of that form. So don't have your wild shaper as the main carrier of items for your party. If you are looking for more Baldur's Gate builds, I will have my playlist linked here, so you can check out my builds I've made for all of the other classes available in the early access. Please follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and on Twitch, where I stream 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, Australian night times. It's in the middle of the night for most of you, but if you are Australian, please do check me out. Thank you for watching this video. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.